I didn't want to make this video just to say that games are art. As far as I'm concerned, it's rarely a debate worth engaging in, and nowadays, when people argue the point, I feel we learn more about them as people than about the nature of art. I wanted to make this video to take it a step further and argue why games aren't just art, in terms of societal or cultural impact, in terms of their aesthetic value. They're potentially the highest form of it. Of course, back in the day when games looked like this, or this, I can begin to understand where the arguments came from. But things have changed a lot since then. The medium has become incredibly sophisticated, the tools have improved, and now they're accessible to almost anyone. We've gone from early synths and 8-bit music to symphonies. Now, all of this is wonderful, but it's also missing the point. Art isn't just graphics, it's not computer architectures or game engines. Art is about aesthetics and the questions that surround ideas like beauty or cultural value. We've been posed the narrative and philosophical questions of games like BioShock and the Stanley Parable, which I would argue can influence your thinking as much as any of the classics in painting or literature. And through empathy games like this War of Mine, you can experience the callousness of war through the eyes of a civilian, where you interact and engage with conflict rather than just learn of it. Another game, That Dragon Cancer, is as much a biography and a memorial as it is a game. It was built by two parents to immerse you in their experience of raising and losing their son. It's raw, in a way I don't think you can achieve with a less interactive medium. If you haven't played, just watch the trailer and I challenge you not to feel a small fraction of that loss. They don't just expand the scope of our empathy. Games can leave us feeling genuine awe and suddenly aware of our smallness in the universe. Games like Journey give you an almost spiritual feeling that would normally associate with sunsets or seeing the Milky Way way up in the heavens. The most defining aspect of games compared to other media is their interactivity. You don't consume a game like a book or a film. You're an active agent in the entire experience. You can be a part of it and shape its direction as opposed to simply observing a series of events unfold in front of you. There's one particular experience that I still remember years after the fact. In this War of Mine, on scavenging a supermarket for supplies, you stumble upon this. An armed soldier who will try to rape a civilian. It's a slow realization. You've already developed a vague sense of unease on seeing soldiers outside settlements, but if you eavesdrop you realize what's about to happen. Now, you can do the purely self-interested thing and hide, and scavenge the safer areas or wait for it to be over with. Or you can intervene with the very real possibility of dying for your principles. The difference is that even though this was a character, and not a particularly developed one at that, because of the interactivity you can't detach yourself in the same way. You can't dissociate yourself from the consequences of your actions or your inaction. When you play this, you know you can just leave, find somewhere safer, but that doesn't necessarily sit well with you. In a lot of games you can just put on a character and run through the game in the most malicious way possible just for the novelty of it. But in others, with the right tone and gameplay, it's hard not to see what you do as a reflection of yourself. The interactivity means that the experience is as it is because of you, and this is your decision to make. The truth is that this happened years ago. I don't remember the name of the character, the conversation you overheard, or even what the supermarket looked like. I remember the feeling more than anything else. The uncertainty and a little later the sense of shame in realizing that I seriously considered avoiding the entire problem. For what it's worth, as soon as the soldier stepped forward I ran in and somehow survived the janky combat mechanics. Things turned out okay in the end, but I still remember that hesitation years after the fact. Even though it was just a game, it also wasn't. This takes us to our next point. This interactivity and agency readily leads to something much more difficult to achieve: empathy. Whether it's through the eyes of an immigration officer in Papers, Please, or a refugee in this War of Mine, the scope of your experience of the world changes. It's the most literal interpretation of walking a mile in someone else's shoes. The theme doesn't have to be traumatic either. Games can help us empathize with everyone from truck drivers to slime ranchers to that hyper-aggressive goose we've all come across at some point in our lives. Every artistic medium broadens the scope of your individual human experience, but games are just that much more immersive. And there's a reason they're so immersive. Given enough funding, the possibilities games can design for are almost endless, even overwhelming if you're new to the industry. No other form of artistic expression has to consider art, sound, environments, writing, narrative, characters, levels, mechanics, engineering, and so much more in such an interactive way at a scale of tens or sometimes hundreds of millions of players. It's so much potential scope that games can almost completely neglect elements of this and still be world-class. Almost every other artistic medium can be expressed in games, and it's in tying these threads together that you can make statements like BioShock and Journey. Lastly, it's that combination of interactivity, other media, and how you literally personify your role in the art that allows games to create some of the most interesting social phenomena you can observe today. Games aren't just those things you play to test yourself or wind down with your friends. They're our mass media. They're our social networks, our alter egos, our markets, and our arenas. You can see it in EVE Online, where people will put hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line for their politics. You can see it in everyone rushing outside to relive their childhoods and catch the Pokemon down the road. It's in the grand exchange outside Varrock, and yeah, it's even when you and your friends hide in that first dirt hole you had dug in Minecraft. And that's only what's already been. It's what we've achieved in only a few years of network computing. In the future, consumer haptics, spatial computing, improvements in wireless networking mean that the border between games and reality will become increasingly blurred. Facebook and Oculus are probably a haptic startup away from a meaningful shot at building Ready Player One's Oasis. Games will become our infrastructure, the base layer where we live our lives, not just where we build and play. From a purely aesthetic standpoint, of course games can be the highest form of art. Many of these emergent phenomena are in fact beautiful, the shared experience of millions of people in a single moment in time, with a canvas that wide, might be like nothing else we experience as a collective. What's more interesting is that art is really just the beginning, and that in the future, games stand to change everything.